Did you know babies are far more exposed to microplastics than adults are? Just in their environment, in their food, in their drink, in their clothing, in their exposure. And on top of that, the percentage of how much microplastics are taken into their body through what they breathe, drink, and eat is so much greater in proportion to their body size and body weight than it is for an adult. Today's episode is not one of perfection. It's not about completely eliminating microplastics. It's about finding the biggest sources of microplastics in our babies' environments and reducing them where possible. It's also not about guilt. Microplastics is something I found out long after my baby was already 3 years old. And so today's episode is the episode I wish I had heard before my baby was born. Hello, I'm Lisa, a paediatric physiotherapist for babies and toddlers. I've seen firsthand how small, everyday habits in modern parenting can lead to big issues for our babies. In this podcast, I'm going to show you how to prevent those issues, treat them if necessary, and restore the joy to parenting. Hello, and welcome back to the Best for Baby podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Rogers-Sargent, and today we are talking about microplastics and how they are affecting our babies and how they make up a huge part of our babies' environments. And although we are not yet sure exactly what impact they may or may not have on our babies, science is still emerging in this field. And whilst the evidence is emerging, I think everyone is agreeing that it's not a bad thing to try and reduce microplastics in all of our lives, as adults as well, but mostly in our little babies who are still developing, who are being exposed to such a high amount of microplastics from the time they are born, whereas most of us adults would have had far less exposure when we were babies. So I think it makes sense for us to reduce while, the jury is still completely out, while we're still learning about the impact of microplastics on our babies and ourselves. I also just want to say about this episode, I am not an expert in the field by any means. In fact, what I'm talking about today comes from the reading I have done in preparation of this episode, podcasts I've listened to where experts have been interviewed, and of course some common sense and information that is out there available to everyone. So when I normally give advice on my podcast, I say, trust me, take home this advice, implement it, use it. You don't have to fact check me. I'm an expert in the field. You can consider me an authority. Today, I'm not saying that at all. I'm certainly not an authority or an expert in the field. So do fact check. And if you decide to make any changes in your life, go for it. Go and research. Go check what I'm saying. But nothing I'm saying is going to be harmful. And although I believe these are major things that are helpful, and I really believe in what I'm saying today, and they are based on things I have already implemented or I'm attempting to implement or planning on implementing, I don't think there can be anything negative coming from what I'm advising you. But do go and do some more research of your own as well. So let's get into it. Let's have a look. Microplastics, what are they? They are basically just any little particles of plastic that are smaller than 5 millimeters. And they obviously are broken down and shedded or given off by larger plastic objects. Now, the problem is just about everything in our houses and in our lives is made of plastic. And so there's a lot of this coming off. And so we are exposed to plastic all the time. Not all plastic is going to be giving off these microplastic particles. It's usually when there are two things applied to those plastic items, and that is heat or friction. And friction happens when we shake our baby's bottles to mix up water and formula powder. Friction can be in a food processor as the blender goes round and round. And of course, heat, that makes sense. That's in your microwave when you heat food up in a plastic container, or again in your baby's plastic bottle where you pour boiling water in, or you put the plastic bottle into a container of hot boiling water to heat your expressed breast milk. These are just examples of how heat or friction are going to cause those plastic containers to release microplastics tiny particles of plastic that your baby then ingests. So they then drink that in the milk, and that goes into the baby's body. Now, we know plastic is in our bodies everywhere. We know there's 3 main ways we get plastic into our bodies, and that's through drinking it, through eating it, and through breathing it in. I haven't seen much evidence about it being absorbed through your skin. I think it's more those 3 ways that it is coming into our bodies. And we know it's there. I heard a podcast where they measured, and people, adults today can have the amount of plastic that could create a credit card inside their brains. So that's a significant amount of these tiny, smaller than 5 millimeter particles of plastic. If we had to add them all up together in just the brain, that's how much they are finding. We know there is microplastic that is in the placenta, so it's crossing through into the unborn baby. I haven't seen it explicitly mentioned, but I assume, therefore, that it's being passed through the breast milk as well. So however much plastic we have, it goes through our bodies into our babies. We also expose our babies to it. And of course, our babies are further exposed to it when we hold them against our bodies, when we touch them with our hands that have been holding something plastic, or our clothing that has got synthetic fibers in it. So it very much is everywhere, in our homes, out on the street, in our, modern environment. And I don't think we should aim for 100% getting rid of microplastics, but we'll look at the most common ways it is coming in today into our bodies and our babies' bodies, and we'll also look at some easy wins, some easy ways of reducing that load. So, as I said, it's an emerging science. We don't know exactly the impact of these microplastics on our bodies, but what scientists are speculating and what the evidence is starting to show is that microplastics in the body cause inflammation. Now, we know most chronic disease starts with chronic inflammation in the body that then goes on to cause cancer, diabetes, cardiac disease, autoimmune disease. All of these start with inflammation that is chronically in the body. So it's not a quick inflammation in response to an illness or an injury that is then resolved and healed. It's chronic inflammation that is being caused by your body responding and treating something as an attack, like microplastics, like poor diet, any of the foods that we are learning about that can also cause inflammation in the body. And so that is why they are suggesting that microplastics are linked to chronic illness, or it predisposes you, gives you a greater risk of developing chronic illness if you have a lot of microplastics in your body. The other thing that it seems to be pointing towards is that they are hormone disruptors. Now, we know hormones control your whole body, so any of the major bodily functions can be affected if your hormones are disrupted. But, off the top of my head, if we think about things like the thyroid function, which is something I've lived through recently, infertility, diabetes, again, is to do with your hormones. There are just so many things that can happen when our hormones are disrupted. Then the other big area that they find microplastics are having an impact on is our gut health. Now, gut health is quite trendy at the moment. I'm sure you will have heard of people speaking about the gut microbiome, but we know good gut health is essential for good mental health and also good immune health. And so we find people with leaky gut or a poor microbiome, people who don't have a lot of good bacteria in their gut, are more at risk of having autoimmune disease. Or shall I say, it seems that people with autoimmune diseases, if you look back, seem to have poor gut health. It seems to be that way, a correlation. So this is what is emerging. And recently, you may have seen on Netflix, there was a documentary made called The Plastic Detox. And they took 5 or 6 couples who had unexplained infertility, and they went into their homes. They took 3 months where they basically detoxed from plastic, and they, looked at the sources of microplastics in their lifestyles and reduced or removed them. And the reason why they did it for 3 months was because the life cycle of a sperm is 72 days, so just over 2 months. And so the hypothesis was that 3 months was enough time for them to detox, get rid of microplastics, new sperm to be created, that sperm to mature enough to then be used in order to see if they could conceive with a healthy sperm that had been created in an environment with reduced microplastic exposure. So they didn't give a huge amount of time for the microplastics to move out of the body. They just stopped the exposure, and 3 months later, they had a look. And 3 months later, they saw that the sperm count and motility and whatever was much better in pretty much all the couples, and that correlated with a reduction in the microplastics in their blood. So they saw that the removal of these plastic items in their environment had resulted in a significant decrease in microplastics in the body and in their blood tests and whatever tests they were doing, and then the improved motility and health of the sperm. And then, they followed them up, I can't remember how long afterwards, but all of the couples except one conceived and had a baby without IVF following this. So this was the documentary. And for me, it just, this, along with everything that scientists are saying, and there's, multitudes of people speaking about it now. And I just thought it can't do any wrong to start making changes in our own lifestyle. So let's have a look and see what are the biggest culprits of microplastic exposure in your baby's environment. So the first is obviously going to be their bottles. If your baby is formula fed or even expressed breast milk, because remember, we pump our breast milk and it's warm, it's body temperature. I don't know if that's hot enough to cause microplastics to leach into it. I'm not sure. But we then put it in a plastic bag. We then defrost that. Either you put the bag in the microwave or you put it in boiling water. And then we put it into a plastic bottle and we put that in a container with boiling water to heat it up to the right temperature to then feed our babies. If you've got formula, you put the powder in your plastic bottle, you pour boiling water in, you shake it, you allow it to cool, or you add some cooled boiled water. You may have a plastic kettle, as I did until about a year ago, when I suddenly realized I had started to get rid of plastic bottles and plastic this and plastic that in my house, and all the time I was boiling everything in a plastic kettle that I'd never clocked. So it was incredibly difficult to find a non-plastic kettle, but we managed in the end. After I bought a stainless steel kettle with a plastic lid, and I saw the water boiled up and was dripping off the plastic lid back into the kettle. So then we had to buy another kettle that had a stainless steel lid as well. So they are out there. That's an easy swap. But going back, there are just so many points along the way where you're going to be introducing extreme heat. And of course, shaking. You shake the milk up, you shake the formula into the water to dissolve. There's a lot of friction, and we know those are the ways in which the microplastics leach into the milk. The other thing is, if you have any scratches inside your plastic bottle, that scratched surface is going to be far more partial to leaking out microplastics from it. So that's your milk feeds and the most common ways that we are seeing microplastics leach into what our baby is drinking. But also, if you are using cold milk, you pour it into your baby's plastic bottle that you have sterilized. Now, again, I had a plastic sterilizer that I'd put my plastic bottles in, and at high temperatures, that bottle would be sterilized. And then I would pour, my milk in and as you know, boiling water into those bottles as well. So that's along the way, there's just so much opportunity for the microplastics to get in there. Again, you might be washing your bottles in the dishwasher at 50 degrees or 65 degrees. Now, when you move on at about 6 months to weaning, as I did again, and this is why I say this is the episode I wish I had heard, because I made all the mistakes. So if this episode can get out there and help you make one less mistake because you've heard it, I'll be glad. But when I weaned my daughter, I was so proud of myself. I was cooking all sorts of things and making purees for her from scratch. I didn't buy any pouches, and I was really pleased with it. But I'd cook something, it would be boiling hot, and I'd dump it all into my plastic food processor, whiz it up, so boiling hot and friction as it gets processed down into a puree. And I'd be thrilled with this puree that I'd made my daughter that was obviously full of microplastics too. So that's a big one. The other thing is that we buy pouches for our babies as well, and usually the coating of those pouches will have microplastics in them. Most snacks our babies will have some kind of coated lining. We often, as they get older, we go and buy them baby chinos much like what we do as adults, the lining of those supposed paper cups, they're lined with microplastic as well. And that's a really big way of getting microplastics into your body, is using those takeaway cups. The other thing is, as soon as you've made your puree, you then go and decant it into your little plastic weaning pots and freeze those. And again, it would still be boiling hot. I'd put it into a plastic pot and put that in the freezer. You might then heat it, put it in the microwave and defrost it, and then, tip it out into a plastic bowl and put it back in the microwave. You might make your baby some porridge in the microwave in a plastic bowl. So these are all easy fixes. Don't use the plastic in the microwave, basically. And try and find other alternatives to store portions of purees. If you have to use your plastic blender or food processor, if you have to put them in plastic pots, wait till it's cooled down. You're going to reduce the amount of leaking of microplastics into the food that way. If we then move on to something that we don't always think about, it's your nursery dust or dust in the nursery. So your baby has, carpeting. Most of our carpets are synthetic. Bedding, clothing, toys, whatever else you may have in the nursery. All the dust, all the microplastic that sheds off there and goes onto your carpet, which your baby then crawls across, lies on the carpet. I am always telling parents, give your baby opportunity to be on the floor. It's the most important thing developmentally, on the floor, on the floor. If you're so lucky as to have carpeted floors, that's amazing. Put them on the carpet, on their little tummies. It's perfect. And in the meantime, your baby is right up against that carpet. So we all have the same amount of microplastic dust in our bedrooms. But as adults, we're not lying on the carpet, breathing it in, creeping and crawling on our hands and then putting our hands in our mouths. So they just have more exposure to those things that adults are exposed to as well. We also look at their clothing. Of course, a lot of clothing is synthetic nowadays. I bought fleeces. My daughter slept in fleecy pajamas, and that was the only thing that would keep her little body warm. If her hands came out of her sleeping bag, the fleecy pajamas were the thing that kept her warm, and that has got a really high percentage of plastic fibers in it. So, all of this is just on the baby all the time. And then the fact is that also with all of these things, babies are constantly mouthing and sucking them. So, if any of their clothing, they may suck on it. If you're wearing synthetic clothing and you put your baby on your chest, they're inhaling it, they're sucking it. Just by nature of the way that babies are, it creates more opportunity for contact with those microplastics. A lot of the floor mats and play mats that I advertise, and I say get these, it's really important for your baby's development, are of course also made out of plastic. Babies' toys. Who doesn't have a house full of plastic baby toys? And again, it's fine if they were playing with them like older children play with them, but babies put everything in their mouths. Their teething rings go in the mouth. They then chew on the teething rings, breaking off tiny little microplastic particles. Then, if you think about the equipment that we put them in, their little faces are never far from that equipment. So, like me sitting on this chair that I'm sure contains a huge amount of plastic, I'm that much further away from it. Whereas a little baby lying in a pushchair, he's right up in it. If they're lying on their backs, it tends to extend past their faces, and it's just all plastic around them. They're inhaling almost those like plastic fumes that come off it. The car seat is, we know cars are a terrible source of microplastics because they bake in the sun. The whole contents of the car is made out of plastic. And then as soon as it gets super hot like that, you open the door and you get into that car, you then close the door and you're just inhaling all those particles that have been given off by the plastic material inside the car in the heat. Even more so for the little baby who's now put in the car seat and is lying down in it, that much closer to it, less fresh air probably, because none of us really open the window where the baby is and let wind come flying all over them. And then again, your baby might be sucking on it, breathing in it. Even the seatbelt straps will have those protectors on them that the baby doesn't get hurt. Those will have a high percentage of plastic in them. So their environments are just full of plastic, plus they're geared to explore that plastic more, to inhale more of that plastic, to pick it up, to put it in their mouths, to be fed it in their milk, to be fed it in their food. And their bodies are so much smaller than ours, so the percentage of all of that stuff coming in is greater in proportion to the size of their bodies than it is for us. We know that scientists are saying it's leading to chronic inflammation, poor gut health, and hormone disruption. So what are we going to do about it? We can't make our homes 100% plastic free. You can't drive yourself crazy and you can't feel guilty about it, but you can make small changes without breaking the bank. And that's the thing, we are stretched as it is, buying all the stuff that babies need. So you need to be sensible about this and find quick wins where you can. So I'm going to give you my top 5 suggestions, knowing that you don't need to rush out and buy something new and switch it. Finish what you've got. Next time you have to buy something that perhaps has slightly less plastic in it. And I think that is the most sensible starting point. So for me, if we look first of all at milk feeding, if you can breastfeed from the breast, obviously there's 0 microplastics there. If you are expressing milk, try express it into, if you can, a glass bottle. If you can't, what you want to then be careful of is how you heat your milk up. So if you can, allow it to slowly defrost if it's been frozen. Don't put it in boiling water or in the microwave to defrost. Let it defrost naturally, then pour it when it's liquid into a glass bottle, a ceramic cup, anything you can to heat it. And then once it's cooled back down to the correct temperature for your baby, pour it into their plastic bottle if you have to use a plastic bottle. If you can get glass bottles, there are stainless steel bottles, but I find, I once tried that. My daughter has a stainless steel water bottle and I tried to see if I could give her a warm drink in there, but the stainless steel gets hot on the outside. So for me, the glass bottles are the best. We did switch, and when my daughter was 3, and we got glass bottles for her with medical grade silicone teats. My understanding is that silicone is not plastic. It doesn't cause microplastic particles to be released, and you get medical grade and you get food grade. And apparently either of those are fine and safe. So do your own research on that point. But certainly I would prefer a silicone teat or a silicone nozzle for water drinking bottles, because our kids all have to have water bottles, of course. Our children, as they get older, they need to take water bottles to school and nursery. And so we give them the plastic bottles, we bring them home, we wash them in the dishwasher. So wherever you can, get a glass bottle or a stainless steel bottle. If you're going to be using it for hot, probably a glass bottle is better, and a silicone teat or a silicone nozzle for the top of the bottle to drink out of. That's not majorly expensive. You don't have to replace it immediately, but as you go forward, as you need new things, replace with those rather than rebuying your plastic bottles. Then if we look at your food, again, I spoke briefly about purees. If you have cooked something that you're going to puree, wait for it to cool down, put it in your blender, and then puree it up. Then it should be cool enough to put into your plastic pots. If you can, don't use plastic pots. Also, I've seen on Amazon, I haven't bought one myself because we don't use the food processor so much anymore, but they do have glass food processors with steel blades that are like 30, 40 pounds. They're not massively expensive, but that could be something if you are doing a lot of pureeing and you need to use, put it in hot, puree it, and then let it cool, and then put it into your pots, or see if you can find some other way of storing your baby's purees. I think if we look at, in terms of even older children, all their snacks, their pouches, the lining of those pouches usually have microplastic in it. So it's just being aware, what can we avoid? Okay, today we need to use one of those pouches, fine, but it's not going to be something we use every single day or 3 times a day, if you know what I mean. We're looking to limit, not completely remove. So that's food and drink. My third big one is cleaning, regularly cleaning your baby's nursery or the carpets that your baby is lying on, creeping, crawling on. So hoovering to get rid of as many shedded particles as possible, and what we call damp dusting. So wiping down surfaces with a damp cloth as opposed to just dusting it and sprinkling it around and then it's settling on the carpet where your baby crawls. Then we want to look at the clothing that your baby is sleeping in and wearing during the day. So you're going to look for your natural fibers. 100% cotton is not hard to find now. And, a lot of the stores, just your entry-level stores, are doing 100% cotton, not massively expensively. And so for me, the next time you buy your baby clothing, just make sure you're buying 100% cotton. They say linen is fantastic for bedding and really good for you, but you can, again, go for cotton. I think what's really important and essential for us as adults, and certainly babies, as they get older and you're moving into underwear, is to go for your 100% cotton underwear always, and then slowly try to move outwards with their outer clothing as well. Now, you need to bear in mind as well that when you're holding your baby, whatever, like this that I'm wearing, that is a terribly synthetic material, my shirt, but I'm not cradling a baby on my chest today. So if I was going to have a baby on me most of the day, now that I know better, I might try and look through what clothing I have, what is 100% cotton, and try to wear those items of clothing more often than the synthetic fibers. Also, whatever I've been handling, touching, I may try to make sure I wash my hands before I'm handling my baby and they sucking my fingers. Again, with your baby's toys and things that baby is sucking, you're going to look at the teething rings, go for the medical grade silicone or the food grade silicone toys, teething rings, as much as possible, rather than your plastic chewy teething toys. And then my 5th point would be to ventilate. Try and get open windows, open front door as much as possible, because as air is circulating, you are getting rid of some of those accumulations of plastic particles that are being shedded inside your house. Now, that's a bit of a whistle stop, and as I said, I'm not an expert, but I think all of that is quite sensible. It's relatively doable. But what I'm going to do is create a checklist, a nice easy checklist for you to follow, to just remind yourself of the big areas where we are seeing the greatest leakage of microplastics into our babies' environment. So this is specifically for babies. And then I will give you, quick fixes along the way in that resource. I haven't made it yet at the time of recording this, but once it is up, I will put a link in the show notes to it. So hopefully it's there when you're listening to it, and you can get yourself a checklist to just help you to reduce your baby's exposure to all this microplastics. But I think my main take-home message for today is you're going to do a little bit here and there wherever you can. You cannot be absolute about it. You know that you cannot control your baby's environment. They're going to step out onto the road where there's a car driving past with rubber tires, and as those tires, are driving along, they are shedding microplastic particles. You cannot possibly control everything. But like everything else I try to say is, let's be sensible where we can. And so it's that thing that everyone says, it's the 80%, 20% rule. You most successful when you are following it 80% of the time. You don't have to get it 100% right to really make a difference. So that's where we start. The second thing is no guilt. And I say that repeatedly, probably because I'm saying it for myself, because I made all the mistakes. But the thing that kind of helps me to feel better about this and not so guilty is that there seems to be improvement when we do reduce our exposure to microplastics. So, like in the documentary I spoke about, the couples went on to have children, and in a relatively short period of time, they could see changes in the test results in the body of the amount of microplastics in the body. And so it seems like our body can eliminate it, perhaps can get rid of the microplastics if we reduce the exposure. So maybe, I don't know, but I'm hoping that maybe all that plastic I exposed my baby girl to can work itself out of her body if I'm not constantly replacing it with more microplastics. So that's where I'm coming from. That's what I'm hopeful for. There was a Stephen Bartlett podcast episode as well where he was interviewing an expert on this, and she, please don't quote me on this, but she seemed to indicate that fiber was really helpful. If we have a diet rich in fiber, that also seemed to be quite a helpful way of getting rid of some of the microplastics in our body. So I think there's definitely hope, but I think we need to increase our awareness because it's a very new field. And I think the more we can share this message with people, the more we can be aware, the more we can limit exposure for our little babies. So, as always, please do share this episode. I feel quite passionate about this topic. As I've said, I wish it was something I had known. So it would be really awesome for us to help other mums out there not to make the same mistakes. And with that, I wish you all the best and all the best for your baby.